Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robby Russell. On this episode, Hila Fish, who is a Senior DevOps Engineer and SRE, is a public speaker, a core organizer of events like DevOps Days Tel Aviv, and a member of numerous tech communities. Hila joins us from Israel. Hila Fish, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained infrastructure code?
First of all, have an infrastructure as code, because some companies still do things the manual way, or at least have infrastructure as code, but not have everything in their infrastructure maintained in infrastructure as code. And then some of the things are manual, some are in code, and then it's very hard to maintain and really get a grasp of everything that you have. So if I say if you do something and adopt infrastructure as code, at least do it consistently and make sure everything that you have is maintained as such.
You know, one thing is I don't come from the infrastructure code historically. I've dabbled here and there with some Terraform configurations that other people have worked on and tried to figure out how to make changes. And I think something that I've always been curious about is, do you have advice for software developers that are trying to wrap their hand around it? Because I feel like, let's just take if you're working with like AWS or Google Cloud or something, and you're not really sure what some of the configurations are, and you want to try something quickly, it sometimes feels quicker to just go check a box in the user interface and like, what does this do? And then you go test something and come back. But also wanting to understand that you want to be able to track your changes over a period of time and know who changed it, why, was that the thing that did what you wanted it to? How do you think of, or how do you kind of think about that in terms of exploring while also trying to codify your organization's infrastructure code?
So exploring is nice because sometimes, let's say a developer needs a bucket for their purposes, and they don't know all of the features, like what is exactly the retention policy? What does it cover? So in order to really understand all of these things, I'm all for doing things like experiencing it through your feet and really do whatever you need to do and get your hands dirty in order to make sure that you understand what you're doing. But then once that you finish to play with the things, now you know exactly what is needed and what are the configurations that you need. Now it's time to make it, organized and in code and make sure that everything that you need is well conveyed in code as well. And it can be also established with self-service. So this is actually something that we did during work, in which they know what they need because they created some buckets until now. We created them the module of Terraform in Terraform to create the buckets, and then they just created themselves. They open a PR. I'm the one to just review the PR, see that everything is okay, and if so, I just approve it. So that way, I enable them to do whatever they want and still have guardrails as in the pull request review to make sure that it is done properly.
How do you approach pre-planning while still fostering an environment that encourages experimentation and innovation within your software development teams? I know you're kind of talking about giving them a place to play and they can, send you a pull request when they're ready, but do you feel like they need a lot of training, or do you kind of just let people just do a lot of experimenting and then come back? When do you know that something that they're enabling or proposing may or may not be necessary? Is it just that outside of the realm of what your team just decides is acceptable, or is that kind of obvious?
Developers usually know their realm pretty good, which is code. And then whenever they need to do stuff in infrastructure, which is usually the realm of us DevOps engineers or system engineers, then we are the ones to come and say, hey, are you sure you need that, or stuff like that. So yeah, there is a give and take in this area exactly. So if they ask for something, we don't just say immediately yes. We ask the relevant questions in order to make sure that what they ask for is really what they really need, and not just, hey, let's give us the biggest machine type in AWS just because we can. No, we can, but it will cost a lot of money, and we don't want that. So if you do request a GPU machine, let's understand why do you really need it. If they don't have this knowledge, and that's okay, we don't really expect them to know all the bits and pieces in infrastructure because this is why we are there. At least we will be there in the pre-planning phase to understand, okay, are you sure that what you are asking is what you need? If not, let's see and really plan ahead in order to make sure that we don't waste too much money for the company, that we give your application whatever it really needs and not too much and not too less.
I always find it interesting when the conversation around like how large of a container or CPUs you're going to need, or how large of a machine you're going to need to run your application on. If it's like a new prototype of something, are there some good strategies that you and your teams have figured out to like calculate something like that, to quantify that? Like, how do you go about having those conversations if it's like for internal usage for initially versus something that's going to be public facing? Is because sometimes I feel like some developers are just kind of guessing and they don't really know. And they're like, wow, this one seems, we'll see how far this one gets, right? But I don't know if they know that there's necessarily a good way to calculate that process.
Wise, I don't know if there's an actual calculate method that you can do. Maybe there is, and I'm just not aware of it. But the thing that I will do is that, first of all, I will set up dashboards for them, also in Dev. Whenever they have their applications, they have dashboards to look at, and then they can spot trends. And also they can utilize stress tests and load tests in order to simulate production behavior as much as we can, of course. Nothing is really, the same. But as much as we can, we will simulate production behavior. And then they can check the behavior of the application and say, okay, we gave it 4 gigabits of RAM, but it doesn't really need it. It needs only 200 megs, and that's it. So dashboards and monitoring in general, and also making sure you run the proper tests, like load tests and stuff like that, could help you understand if you calculate it correctly or not.
When you're thinking about your interactions with software engineers, are there aspects of DevOps that you find are most often like misunderstood, like in terms of what your role or what's involved in DevOps, or maybe overlooked?
So I would say that the whole culture of DevOps is basically, until, let's say, system engineers were like the guardrails, the gatekeepers of production, and they had to say no to everything, or at least that's what they felt, that they need to say no to everything that the software ask for, because software engineers ask for, because we need to protect production at all costs, right? So the whole idea of DevOps is basically, let's understand how can we say yes to you, because we understand we are both here for the same reason. We want to make our business successful. Both have like maybe different ways of achieving it, but we're still here for the same goal. So once we both understand that, and we have this business mindset that we are here to make our company successful, now let's see how can I say yes to you. And then priorities could shift, because the developers want X, maybe I want Y, but what the developers need at the moment is more important for the success of the company. So then I will shift my priority in order to help the developers achieve whatever they need, because we want to achieve the goal of making the company successful.
What do you think the contributing factors to that mind shift led to that? I mean, I'm remembering, like, I feel like you have a system engineering and sysadmins and things like that, other titles that have been used a couple of decades ago. I also think about like database administrators were a thing, and then they were the ones protecting the data. Like the database needs to be protected at all costs, and like you had to get everything pre-approved with them. And I feel like that's drastically shifted quite a bit over the last few decades. Do you feel like it was more of a shift that there was a bottleneck there, or was it more of we needed to remove some barriers, or is it that there may be more of a cross-pollination of similar skill sets kind of overlapping more now, with like you're working on infrastructure code and like maybe rather than manually configure everything, not that there wasn't code and configuration files that could be versioned and and source controlled in the past and stuff like that, but like what do you think kind of contributed to that, the world that we find ourselves in now?
I would say that there was a bottleneck, the same as there was a bottleneck in terms of software engineers and DevOps or system engineers. So it's the same. We have things, we think that we need to guard them at all costs, whether if it's our infrastructure or our databases. But things shifted, and we would see less, at least, I don't know how it is in other countries, but at least in Israel, we see less DBAs like in the old times, and now databases are being managed by either DevOps engineers or even by the developers directly, or data engineers. So, the responsibilities shift, or at least divided between a couple of disciplines in a way that allows everyone to take care of it from their own angle. So I would say that because of that, the bottleneck got released a bit because things are still getting maintained and getting taken care of. But since it's more coupled with the other aspects of each to its own and the work that they do, I think it makes the bottleneck reduced as opposed to previous years.
That makes sense. And you're kind of thinking about the bottlenecks that kind of happen on both ways. And there's interesting that they're more of a shared ownership, and maybe it's more of like a team-based ownership where I feel like it was always more consolidated around like primarily like the DBA or like a small team that was managing that, responsibility. Now we get this like shared thing. Do you feel like the tooling that we have available makes it easier for people to feel like they're very proficient with these things, or do you feel like that's diluted a little bit as a result in terms of like how experienced you can be with being a really good manager of a database and performance and understanding all of the things that go into being a really good, not that wasn't maybe a little bit of a black box in some ways too. I think we just trusted the DBA knew what they were doing, but like I think there's always a little like, how can you be really, really experienced at all things, you know what I mean? When it's kind of like a shared thing.
Yeah, so I would say that the solution, I don't know if it's a solution or a band-aid, but the thing is that now we have managed services that manage, and the cloud providers manage the databases for us, RDS and AWS and all sorts of solutions in various cloud providers. So I would say we basically handed the need of knowing how things work and all the moving parts in a database, and there are a lot of things to know. We moved it and we transferred the wand to the cloud providers and say, hey, please take care of it for us, and I will just use it as a user and just have my data stored, and that's it. So that definitely helped achieve simplicity, because then you don't need to know all of these bits and pieces, and you can just rest assured that it is being managed by the cloud provider, and that's that, and you can just use it as a user, and that's it. Is it good? Is it bad? Everyone can, attest to what they are thinking, but I think we can definitely say that it decreased a lot of overhead from the people that need to manage it daily.
We'll be back with our interview with Hila in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robby. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you for making time to listen to the Maintainable Software Podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please pop over to Apple Podcast, write a review, and if you're not sure what to write, you can say 3 stars. Robby has a goofy voice, goes on lots of rambles, but he has good guests. Or 5 stars, one of my favorite guests was Hila Fish. Just say which one of the episodes you really liked. That could be all you need to write. And give us a rating. It helps make all the difference. The more you rate, the more reviews, the more we seem to pop up on the radar of other people. So that gets us more listeners, and that gets me more excited to keep doing this. So thank you. Also, is there someone you think I should interview on Maintainable? Shoot me an email to Robby with a Y at maintainable.fm. And now let's get back to our interview with Hila Fish. I think that's a fair assessment of that. So one of the topics that I was really looking forward to speaking with you about is about a project that you worked on related to migrating an entire development code base from Bitbucket to self-hosted Gitlab. I think that was a Bitbucket Cloud you were using prior, right? Could you first share some of the things that went into like the business decision, why your organization felt that was necessary, that led to the migration, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about like what led to I assume a successful outcome?
So first of all, I'm not sure I can cover the business reasoning behind it, because it was in my previous companies, and I'm not sure I can discuss it or not. So let's leave it to a mystery. But in terms of the migration itself, it was successful because even though I had very little time relatively to deal with it, because I did it in 1.5 months, and I did it almost entirely by myself. Of course, I needed this team to help me with issuing a certificate, and this team for LDAP integration and stuff like that. But mostly the work was done by me solely. Still, it was successful because I deployed it first on dev environment. I did some of the major repositories migration there in dev. And then I encountered all of the issues. Of course, there were issues that I encountered only in production, because Murphy and Murphy's Law, but still a lot of things I encountered in dev, and then I opened tickets, and some things were resolved by GitLab, and some they say, hey, we have an open ticket in which I still get updates about the ticket being open, and they don't do anything about this ticket, but let's put it aside. But that's the thing. Even though I had little time to deal with it, I still had the ability and the approval, let's say, to set it up as two environments, dev and production. And then all the planning and all the play around, I did it on dev, and then all the conclusions I had, I implemented in production, and that way I also knew how to calculate the time needed for the migration in actual production in a way that wouldn't interfere with the development teams, because I chose to do it on my weekend because I saw that in dev it took time, and I decided to sacrifice one weekend of my own instead of making the entire development teams lose a couple of hours of work because I wanted to do it, if I would do it in during business hours. So definitely things that I could test it in dev, I did it, and things that I saw that I had to shift it a bit in a way that will be good for the business and not waste time for the developers, I did that too.
Interesting. With those types of migrations, I'm assuming there was several phases of it. I'm just like, for example, you would have to potentially, like, I'm just thinking like even my own team's like development environments where like we're using Bitbucket and we're in the middle of a migration to GitHub for a couple of projects, and we're, it's like not all repositories are treated equally. And like, there's like a lot of different things that pop up. Like, well, we can't move this one until we move these three at the same time, or this one has to happen before because it's a dependency. Or there's also like what happens when we actually try to deploy this to production. And is there going to be some weird Git cache issues somewhere with like an origin somewhere, like the fun things. But was there a process of communication that you were able to like map out a timeline that you knew that people were going to be able to perform certain, like everybody had to do certain things to make this work right? Or were you able to remove a lot of the manual steps that some like individual developers or anyone that was contributing to the repositories would need to be doing themselves?
So I would say communication was a very important pillar here, especially because I did it all by myself. So I had to communicate a lot of things to my managers to understand where am I at this project and the status of the project, and also to the teams that the repositories need to be migrated because they need to know what's going on at all points in time. And also I communicated things to the team leaders of all the teams beforehand because I wanted a buy-in. I wanted to make sure that they are harnessed to this, and even though I'm doing it by myself, I have their support and I have their collaboration. So communication was definitely key here. And in terms of the actual migration, I mapped the repositories, and then I basically communicated with each team separately, and I said, okay, when can we do it? I want to do it in a bulk, aka let's move all your repositories together in order to avoid these dependencies. So then I just communicated with them. I coordinated when we should do it. And when we actually did it, I told them, you're not going to be able to commit for a second or a couple of minutes when I did the migration, because I knew that these types of repositories were small enough to be able to migrate it quickly. So I just removed permissions from Bitbucket, so to make sure that nobody will commit. That way I know exactly that the latest state of the repository is exactly that, and no discrepancies there. And then I migrated. I told them, hey, here you go. Everything is set on GitLab. Start working with that. So yeah, definitely communication and coordinate with all teams were a necessity here.
I'm admittedly not that familiar with using GitLab, but I'm curious, were you able to do things like migrate like pull requests or anything like that? Was that something that the team was using much of, or was that part of something that you were able to retain that between like a migration from Bitbucket to GitLab?
If I remember correctly, pull requests were migrated. Yes, they were migrated, but there was a hiccup or a bug in the migration or generally in GitLab, in a way that you have the pull request, but the creator of the pull request was administrator, aka the user that did the migration, which is me. Again, how did I know about it? I did it in dev. I notified them upfront, hey, this is what's going to happen, and just be aware and see that, hey, maybe wait for like crucial pull requests for after the migration, or if some are not really important, then it's okay that it's with administrator. But from what I remember, this is what the only bug that was related to that, but the pull request itself was still kept intact. Everything was working all good, and only the user got changed. So I told them this is gonna happen. Are you okay with it? Yes, no. And then we continue from there.
That's good to hear. Like at least that information was still able to come across, and then I'm assuming your developers could still figure out whose commits were whose, so you can still kind of figure out who it was, and just know that was just some residue from a database or the migration, which those things happen. So it's better than none of it existing, right? So that's for sure. It's good. Nice to know that there's a fairly happy path for that process. So, we often hear about the importance of company culture and values. How have these elements manifested in your professional life, particularly in the context of software development and DevOps practices? Are there any specific examples you can share?
So yeah, and actually I have a talk that I gave in a conference, in an online conference, and I'm gonna give it also as a keynote in a conference in Utrecht. I hope I pronounced this city correctly, near Amsterdam. So basically, this talk is about how to leverage our values in our day-to-day professional life and not just in our personal life, which means that you don't need to only think about technology whenever you go to get interviewed somewhere and just ask about the technology stack, but also ask about things that matter to you. So, for example, if I care and like one of my leading values that I care about is communication, I need to ask things that really emphasizes if communication is something that is important in the company's culture as well or not. I'll give you an example, and actually that's what I said in my talk. I gave like 10 values, and I showed examples for questions for each value to, in a way that if you answer them, if that these values get manifested in the workplace or not. So you can utilize these questions both during job interview as much as you can, ask questions and see whatever they respond, but also like a retrospective with yourself to see if the current workplace that you have, that you're working in, really manifests the values that you believe in, then it will help you. So for example, for communication, check the Slack messages. Are they, whenever there's an issue that someone raises and someone replies, is the reply fixed? Check now. Or the issue was X. I did a change that Y. And that way, communication is important and people really encourage communication to be conveyed. And then that way, that your values are being kept and really manifested during your day-to-day.
It's interesting. As someone that hires people, it's something that I'm always thinking about when, we're evaluating candidates against, our company core values and such, and the ways that we like to see those manifested, and why we also try to keep people, or if someone's no longer, or we thought they were going to be a good fit for us, but then maybe they're not aligning with values. But it's very important, I think, of all employees or contractors, anyone that's involved in any relationship professionally, to think about these things. And so you mentioned you thought of, came up with like maybe a list of 10 values. Like, how do you kind of like align those with like a company's values? And do you feel like this is something, to me, it feels like something that, and I don't know if this is maybe just my worldview or being in my bubble of being in the United States, but to me, it's felt like this has been an important thing for employees, for them to think about, and me to be more accountable for as an employer for a while now. Do you feel like it's something more like something that's like in your area of the world that's becoming more of a topical thing to have these types of conversations?
I would say that yeah, because that's actually something that I say also in my talk, in fact, that, okay, let's say you have cool tasks, okay? But doing these cool tasks, you have micromanager sitting down in your neck, and you feel pressure to deliver fast because the company believes in delivery and they don't really allow you to do a full research of the tasks that you are given to make sure that things are being done correctly. And you have this pressure of let's do it quickly just because a company believes in delivery. Definitely if the company is not aligned with your values, you will for sure experience frustration. You will feel that you can't really shine because the things that you value and the things that you are strong in are not getting appreciated in the company, because let's say they care about delivery, but you are a person like a very detail-oriented person, and you do things very like in a neat way, but they don't care about it because they adopt a quick and dirty, and as long as there is a product to use, right? So definitely values are something that needs to be examined. I wouldn't say daily because it's very hard and exhausting to do it in a daily manner. But what I suggest is to do like retrospective with yourself. You can choose the cadence however you want. It could be every month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever you feel comfortable to you, and see if your values are still aligned with the company's values. If not, I would say consider replacing your job because it's not worth it. Yeah, we love tech, we love our job, but if it means to give up who we are and what we believe in order to do what the company wants, that's not great. We need to both do what we love and make sure the company values the same things that we value, and that way we both gain from this experience because we deliver what we think is good. Company will understand why we see this is good, and then everyone is happy.
Hey, it's Robby again. Just a quick note to let you know that during the recording of this, we had some technical difficulties. It happens. Our guest had to switch microphones, and so the audio might sound a little different for the rest of the episode, but just wanted to explain why it shifted. Things happen. With that, let's get back to our interview. I think that it's an interesting point there. And one of the things that I always reflect on is when I do participate in interviewing potential candidates to join my company, and I am fully aware that these software engineers could work at a lot of different companies. And I will ask them what it is about our organization that they feel like that would be good for them to want to join, and like what it is about us, the type of work that we do. And the percentage of people that will respond, well, you use technology X. And I'll be like, that's why you want to work for me? Because we just happen to specialize in this one technology, not because the type of work that we do or the type of clients we're servicing. Like, it's just the technology. And it always kind of weirdly bores me in a weird way. And I'm just like, that's like, do you have more to offer than that? But there's like an interesting balance also where I do need people that are excited about the technology and want to do that work. And so there's like this interesting struggle that I have of like, well, I don't want to project my ideas of like what we're doing, like trying to like inflate it to be like we're doing some grandiose thing, because we're a consulting company. We just help people with a similar type of technology stack. So if someone comes in and they're really good at that, excited about that, and they're really happy working with Ruby on Rails 8 hours a day, and then they go home and do whatever they're going to do the rest of their time, that should be okay too. So how do you kind of factor that, like that type of thing up when you're looking for where you're working at and things like that? Do you find that there's some compromise, or is it that there needs to be like a lot of like 100% alignment there?
I would say that, first of all, like if I would be a company, I wouldn't want to hear that people come just because of the stack, because let's say, okay, now we switch stacks and we switch technologies because it doesn't fit our use case anymore. So now you'll leave. You know what I mean? It's like, it shouldn't be that coupled. It should be, and also me when I get interviewed to companies, I remember I came to a company and I interviewed there, and I was disqualified because I didn't have much experience at the time with AWS. And why? Because they knew that my previous job beforehand, I worked 2 years with GCP. Okay, so just because I don't have experience on AWS, you would disqualify me? The concepts are the same. So I wouldn't want to go and work for that company because I don't want them to align me with a specific technology. I want them to hire me because they see the potential and not only potential, but the ability of me to learn whatever I need to. So if now I need AWS, I will learn AWS. Now I need GCP, I'll learn GCP. So you need, in my opinion, companies need to hire not based off the specific knowledge that the people have and bring with them, but what they are able to learn. So, and how you can measure it, you can ask about projects that they did and then see how they react or how they cover the aspects of learning the types of technologies implementing this project. For example, in the GitLab migration that I didn't know anything about GitLab beforehand. And I had to create the GCP project, deploy the Helm chart, which is pretty I think it's the most complex Helm chart I ever encountered, the GitLab one. And at the time I used Helm basic, in a basic way and not complex. So I had to learn Helm like in a more complex way in order to really deal with GitLab. I had to learn GitLab itself because I had to learn all the moving parts in order to deploy it properly. And I did it all, doing implementation, doing the migration, all in 1.5 months. So this is what companies need to look at. Not that I know GitLab. Who cares? They need to see that I'm able to adapt to situations and learn new things on the go. And this is what makes me more valuable. Not the fact that I know AWS or GCP or whatever, but the fact that I'm able to learn whatever I need to on the go.
So I think you make a really good point there. You're trying to look for, when you're looking for jobs, you're looking for employers that will see the potential and know that you can solve very different problems and adapt as things pop up and new change requirements. And that's important. And it's also important for those listening to hear that it's important to try to find people that show a lot of promise and potential. I think that makes sense for a lot of people, but I think one of the things I don't know, are you often in positions to be able to help recruit and hire people yourself very often?
Not much. I did participate here and there in interviews, but not in a full scale.
I think one of the tricky things as someone that does hire is, especially when it comes to, either you're trying to hire people for potential is this challenging thing where if they're kind of junior in their career, they don't have a lot of examples that they can point to and look what I did in these types of scenarios. I was able to figure something out pretty quickly, whereas people that are more experienced, but then they become more experienced specific things. So they tend to emphasize just how much experience they have with specific things. So it's an interesting balance that you're kind of almost advocating, as someone that's experienced, trying to make sure you can show your versatility and that it's not the years of AWS experience. It's look how quickly you're able to pick up new things and adapt to things. But sometimes that's so subjected to, or the environment that you get hired in and the opportunities you have to get to experiment with lots of new things. Some people might end up at a new company and they get to participate in a migration, but then they may never get to work on a lot of new technologies for a long time because it's just everything's working really well and that's stable and it's a good job for everybody, but then they don't look as adaptable on their resume or CV as someone else that switched jobs more often and found these different things. And so it's complicated, I think, for employers to get a sense of that because it's not like there's one way is better than the other necessarily. It's just, you don't really know what your needs are going to be there. But I think it's a good thing to at least reflect on quite a bit.
What's better? I mean, I know what's better for me as a employee, but for a company, it really depends on the point in time that they are in. Because sometimes, let's say they decided to migrate to AWS from on-premise, let's say, for example, and they need someone that is experienced with AWS because then the migration will be quicker. And I'm not saying that there is no importance of having experience with specific things and specific technologies. It's important because, let's say, a lot of people work with AWS, a lot of people work with Terraform. There is a very important aspect to it. I'm just saying it's not the only thing that matters. And I hope companies wouldn't qualify candidates only because of lacking experience with X, but just having the understanding that they did various projects and they are able to learn whatever they need to on the go. But it really depends, again, in the point in time. If they face times of, let's say, migration to AWS, they need people that have strong capabilities in AWS because they want to make sure the migration will be done both seamlessly and smoothly and in the right way, because they have enough experience to come and say, okay, I've seen these kind of things during my career, and I know that the best thing to do here is X. And then you know that the decisions that will be taking are good enough or good to adopt, and then that way there is really a importance to having this specific experience in anything. So yeah, there is a balance that needs to be maintained here. That's why your podcast is called Maintainable.
Yeah.
And I think both are important, but you need to find a balance and not sway one towards the other. You need to make sure both are delivered.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And just, for our listeners, I think another thing to consider, I speak with different companies quite a bit and about their software challenges that they're dealing with. And usually if they're trying to recruit someone and they're like, well, we have this big project we're going to work on in 6 months. And so we need to hire someone that has that experience with that thing. And then we'll talk to them a little bit about it. I'm like, well, that's like a 2-month project. You're trying to make a long-term, multi-year decision, and you're basing it just on that one specific project that you need to tackle, but you have like a 2-year, you want them to stick around for a couple of years. Like, do you have other big, exciting projects that they're going to get to work on? Or could you just hire a contractor specialist to come in for a couple months to help guide your team, make sure that they don't go off the rails too quick, and like do what you can to have a successful thing. But it's an interesting thing where they're like, well, hiring outside seems expensive. And I'm like, but so does keeping someone around for 2 years if they're the expert at that thing. And then they're not going to be, it's like it's such a tricky thing to try to weigh that up. And like, have you had an opportunity to be involved in either as a contractor or bringing in someone just to help out for a little bit on helping like move those projects a little quicker or seamlessly, or training?
Yes. So I had, in one of my previous companies, we had the Cassandra, which is a database. We were lacking experience and knowledge in that area. And we wanted to do, what was it? I think migration for like still bare metal, but different bare metals. And then we had to revisit our backup policy and how to do the migration in a way that wouldn't result in data loss and stuff like that. And that's why we decided to bring a consultant from a consultancy to help us with this knowledge. And we knew that this is just a short-term project, and we just needed this specific expertise in order to really make sure we make the right decisions, and that's it.
And that went pretty well?
Ish. I had the sense I'm a detail-oriented person. I asked a lot of questions, and not all my questions were answered. So, but it worked, and things were okay. So it just means that, some questions were unanswered, but it doesn't mean that the migration or the job that I did was not good based on the things that they recommended. It was good, but it wasn't perfect, because like anything in life, no one knows everything, even a consultancy. So.
I'm curious, have you ever joined a team or organization that, in your opinion, when you showed up, they had suboptimal documentation?
Yes. If that wasn't clear for my for my reaction, yes, definitely. Actually, I have a talk that I give in conferences about that too, about why should you write technical documentation and how to do it in a way that you don't have to be a technical writer in order to write documentation. It's super, super critical for transferring knowledge, for maintaining production systems, because not everything that is in production are things that I touched at. Some things only my team members did, and the onboarding that they did is not like in full extent. So if I have run books, for example, then whatever issues that I have with other systems that I not necessarily touched, then I would be able to maintain it. So that's why really documentation is so important for several and a lot of good reasons. And whenever I saw that companies or departments were lacking documentation, I either created them myself, or I just suggested it to my team leader or other team leaders and say, hey, we should cover this XYZ, and then they added it to the backlog and then to the sprint. It didn't kept only in backlog. And also another thing that I'm really recommending people to do is that in order to, let's say, there are tools out there that help you maintain documents and make sure that they are up to date and stuff like that. But let's say you don't adopt these tools and you want to do it the old-fashioned way. How do you do and make sure that documentation is part of your day-to-day? Make it as the task definition of done. AKA, only when documentation was added or updated, then you can close, and you may close the ticket in Jira or Monday, whatever tool that you're using. And that way you still, once it is enforced, once the team leaders say, hey, you close the ticket without documentation, if it's enforced, then it will be part of the day-to-day, and you know that in every ticket that you are handling, you need to make sure documentation is up to date or even existent.
One of the challenges that I find with documentation is that I think it's a good thing to highlight. You can have part of your checklist, your definition of done, to think about, is this done? So it could be in your PR process or however your team agrees that they're going to work to each other. But when you are someone that joins a company or a team or switch teams in an organization and you start working on a project, you will quickly identify the documentation that seems to be missing because you're not finding it or it's not very clear to you. But it's very difficult to ascertain what documentation is no longer relevant or could be deleted potentially sometimes as well. Have you found you have any tricks up your sleeves on how to track that stuff down? Like, how do you find outdated or documentation that like people are just completely ignoring, but you think maybe I'm new, so I don't want to just assume that this can go away, and it may not be super easy to like tell who else has used this particular documentation. It's because that's the tricky thing about documentation. It's like who's reading this and using it.
First of all, doing onboarding, the onboarding process, they ask you, hey, please read this documentation, and then you'll be onboarded to the team. And actually, I had it. I had a case where I started reading this documentation, and then I had questions about this documentation. I asked the relevant people. They said, it's not updated. I'm like, okay, so let's update it. So then he told me the relevant bits that needs to be updated. I updated the document. I didn't wait for someone else to do it. I did it myself. And then, we have a documentation that is updated. So this is one aspect. Another thing is basically, I would say, be attentive. Two things. First of all, check the publish date. If you see the publish date is 2 years ago, probably it wasn't updated and it's not really relevant, at least to some extent. And also check Slack messages. See if you have a question. I assume, companies utilize Slack the enterprise way, so you have history to check in. Search for your questions and see if people just replied or they refer to documentation. I have it all the time where in some cases, people refer me and other people that, ask the same questions to the documentation, and then great, we have it. Or they only reply in the Slack, and that, okay, it means that no one is really maintaining any knowledge base to transfer this knowledge. So by being attentive, you can identify these kind of things, and then okay, do I have documentation to rely on or not? And also in meetings, if I got referenced by documentation, I referenced documentation myself. When people ask things, I'm like, there's a doc for that, here, check it out. So it's really useful to pay note to these kind of things, and then whether there is documentation that is used daily or not.
That's some good advice there. I think even just the referencing around when you're in meetings or in Slack or what have you, when someone asks a question and you respond to them with documentation, sometimes one of the things that I've start trying to remind myself to do is not just use that as an opportunity to share a link to, a page to Confluence or wherever we have our documentation, but to also, sometimes I don't know where the documentation is offhand, but I might go search for something, and so then part of my response to someone might be, that's a good question. I went to search in Confluence and I searched for this, and this came up with these couple of responses, and this one might be what you're looking for, so that I can leave a little bit of a trail, maybe breadcrumbs of like how I thought about searching for something similar. Thinking, I'm like secretly hoping that will like manifest and people will pick up on those little clues. Doesn't always work, but at least it's like trying to like, I searched in Slack and I found this in a different channel. Maybe this relates. So that way it's not just like, I think this speaks back to your, you mentioned your values, like fixed type of response versus providing a little bit more context. Like I always want to try to paint a picture of how I found this piece of information, because it's not like I have all this stuff just carrying around in my head all the time. It's like, that's not reality. I'm like, I rely on searching things just like everybody else. And so I want to learn how to get better at that.
Actually, it's something that I also reference when I speak about incident management. So whenever someone managed an incident, then I would say I always advocate for sharing the knowledge, because people can learn from your line of thought and how not only learn about the flow of the systems that you dealt with during the incident, but also learn from your line of thought. Let's say someone got the alert and they didn't know where to start searching or debugging. Then they can learn from the line of thought and then understand, okay, I can start from this and this and that, and have like a lead to start with. And that's exactly what you said. Yeah. You show them how to search, which is it's like, there's a phrase, right? Like give you the hook and not the fish. So that's exactly it. I do have, in every job that I work for, I have bookmark of useful docs. and I keep bookmarks of relevant documentation that I need, that I know that I'm gonna use, or at least I have to search. I have to save because I know that I will need it someday. I have this feeling that I'm gonna need it.
That's good advice as well. I think we talk about documentation and notes for the projects. That's like for everybody else on the team, but some of my just maybe showing a little bit of bias here. Some of my best employees I ever had seem to have their own note-taking, bookmarking strategy that I was kind of envious of. And I'm like, I wish I had that skill. I just for whatever reason, my brain doesn't. I'm like, I feel like because maybe it's different for me because I think I'm the owner of the company. So I'm like, all the documentation is my document. It's like my company's documentation. So it's everywhere. I'm always going to have access to it until I'm not going to probably get fired from my company anytime soon. But versus having my own separate documentation, I feel like if I kept it separately, I'd be somehow keeping people on the team from finding it. But I think if you're coming into an organization and you want to keep your own notes around where things are at and stuff like that, that seems like a really effective strategy. Is that something you just have always had through your education curriculum? You've figured that out, or something you've just kind of worked out over the years that kind of works well for you?
I am also keeping notes. I have Evernote, and I have these organized tabs of all the things, like notes regarding Jenkins, regarding Git, and what kind of notes. Nothing that is relevant for, it depends. Sometimes I have notes specific to the workplace that I am. So whenever I leave a company, I check my notes and see if there's something that is related to that company. If so, I don't only delete, I move it to the knowledge base, because then they could benefit from that. So that's one part. And another part are basically notes that I have that are general, like how to delete, the command of deleting a remote branch in Git. I couldn't remember it. I don't know. Now I remember it. It's like git push -- delete branch name, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But for a long time, I didn't remember it. So I'm like, okay, let's keep it in notes. So a lot of things like how to retrieve, all plugins installed in Jenkins. There's a script console. You can run a script there and have all the plugins. Useful. Let's keep it in a note, So yeah, I keep notes for things that I need to do that that I know that I'm going to do often or quite often. But procedure-wise, I would always do it in a conference or Docs code or whatever, and keep it in the knowledge base of the company because I want others to use it as well.
Hey, it's Robby again. I just wanted to let you know that we have a new newsletter that you can go to maintainable.fm, and in the top navigation says join the newsletter or something like that. Click on that. And then what you're going to get is when we have new episodes, you're going to get an email from me that I've written, not by some AI bot. I might use a little bit of AI to help out a little bit, but for the most part, it's me. I'll share some of my thoughts on the episode, some observations I had about it, or things that I think might be good takeaways, and maybe a couple questions, and kind of maybe remind you that there's a podcast you can go listen to. And then also every other week or so, I'm going to shoot you over an email, and I'm going to talk about some episodes from the archives, because I've had over 150 guests so far, and there's a lot of great conversations that, again, one of the things about this podcast is that I'm trying to have conversations that will be useful in hopefully a decade from now. And so, because these are typical things that organizations are dealing with, and I want to capture these conversations and have them persist for quite a while and still be valuable. So yeah, join the newsletter, maintainable.fm, click newsletter. With that, let's get back to our interview with Hila Fish. That makes a lot of sense. Also, I know that you're a core organizer of a DevOps Days TLV, which is at the end of October. Can you tell us a little bit more about the event and its significance within the tech community?
So yeah, DevOps Days is a great event. Specifically in Tel Aviv, it is at the end of October, which actually falls on the dates of Halloween. So that's why our theme for this year is horror stories. So we hope people will come with masks and stuff like that. And the significance of DevOps Days is a huge one, because not only in Israel, where the tech community is very big and people love to come together, discuss tech, meet each other, mingle, network, and listen to technical talks, but also because of the open spaces that we have. And you have open spaces in all DevOps Days events, because there are DevOps Days in Birmingham, London, Chicago, whatever, in a lot of places in the entire world. And in every DevOps Days event, you will find open spaces, which means places where you can just, let's say you don't want to go and listen to a talk at the moment, you want to talk with like-minded people about any topic that comes to mind. So, the event organizers, in our case, it's me in Tel Aviv and other people, of course, and in other places, other people. We send out a form. You fill out what topics that you want to cover in the open spaces, and then there are tables, and you have several groups, and each group talks about a different topic. And this is good, and this allows the community to come together, discuss burning issues, discuss a lot of things. So I would say that, the significance of this event and other events are really important for the tech community, because people really love to come together, ask for opinions, ask how do you do this in your company, and stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to the event this year. I'm sure it's going to be great.
That's awesome. So, and I hope that people show up and wear masks or participate in their horror stories. I think about curious, I know that you're one of the organizers of DevOps Days in Tel Aviv, but also HashiCorp ambassadors, AWS community builders, women in DevOps, etc. For those listening that might be curious about getting or volunteering or contributing with some of these types of events, for you personally, how have these affiliations kind of contributed to your professional growth and your knowledge sharing, in your approach in professionally speaking? I
would say it definitely contributed. I can definitely say I didn't do it for that. I did it for the sake of, humanity. I really love to help people and share knowledge and help other women excel in their jobs and stuff like that. But it started out as just a community work that I do. And this is not only started, this is still why I'm doing it. But I noticed it had a positive impact on my career as well, because now I go to conferences in Israel and people know me. I'm like, how do you know me? Because I saw a post on you online and I saw that you did this and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, that's cool. So there is a positive impact, and it's great to see that the community work is being appreciated, but mostly that people understand the importance of community. And this is what really moves me, let's say, because I really believe in the importance of a community. I think this is what helps people come together, share experiences, and basically that's why it's really, I'm glad that we have this thriving community in Israel, because it's really, we see that it actually works by bringing people together. So.
And I appreciate you kind of pointing that out. And, I know I framed that around how has it helped you professionally? And in hindsight, I should have asked, how has it helped you personally? Do you feel like it's changed do you feel like it's something you felt like you needed to do and you've done, or do you feel like you've personally do you feel better and prouder of how you're spending your time, and that there are byproducts that it can help you professionally? I think I've seen in different incarnations over the years that people want to share their appreciation to those that are helping foster community. And so I think, for the most part, I think people want to see people succeed professionally and they want everybody to succeed. So, but do you feel like it's also maybe on a personal level, it's also helping you in your kind of standing as a human on the planet?
Yeah, because once I started out with public speaking, for example, I did to share knowledge, but then all of a sudden, because I'm more recognizable in the community, people are coming to me and say, hey, it's even, I consider it as an inspiration for you to see you on stage, because it feels like I can do it as well. I, of course, usually hear it from women, but still. And I'm like, okay, wow, inspiration is a very big word. I'm honored to be considered as an inspiration. So things that started out as just me supporting the community, helping people come together, resulted in people really taking it to their level, to their personal, not issues, but personal pain, and say, hey, if she can do it and she does it, I can do it too, because she started out regularly, she just submitted a talk and that's it, or whatever. So that's exactly it. I see that the things that I started out from my personal angle and my personal bracket, I see that it impacts other people as well in terms of their personal life, and also their understanding that community is very important. But of course it also impacts my professional life, because let's say because of this community work, I know a lot of companies. So if I want to go and interview in that companies, I now have contact people to have like my foot at the door, for example. So I would say there's positive things all around, personal and professional as well.
Nice. Do you, as you reflect back on when you started doing that, again, for people listening that are maybe curious about getting involved, but they're thinking, well, who am I? Why me? Maybe they're not ready to speak at a conference. I don't know if you started speaking first and then you started helping out with other types of event organizing, or did you do event organizing and be like, oh, I could probably talk, or did you already have that skill set and comfort level to get up on a stage or to get on a podcast or to give a talk online or host a webinar? Like, those are not things that you don't born having that skill set necessarily. So do you remember what it was like just to get over that first few experiences?
Not only I remember, I tell this story quite often to help people understand that, hey, I started out just as you. So I started out with the community work because I'm organizing DevOps Days along with Sharon and all of the great people for, I think, the last 4 or 5 years now. And how did I start with public speaking? At the end of 2021, during DevOps Days, there was one speaker that bailed on us. And we took an Ignite talk. Ignite is a talk of 5 minutes. We bumped it to be a full talk. And then we had a missing slot of an Ignite of 5 minutes. And it's only a couple of days before the event. Who we will bring? And then Sharon, the main organizer, Sharon Zitzman, she's force of nature, this woman, she came to me and say, okay, please bail us, take this slot, do it. And I'm like, no. And she said, you're going to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. And she said, no, you're going to do it. That's it. End of discussion. I'm like, no, I don't have things to speak about. I don't have time. All of these, the fears and everything surfaced. I'm like, I'm not going to do it. And then she's like, okay, thank you very much. And she just ended the discussion there and like, fact, you're going to do it. And that's it. I'm like, okay. And then I sat down. I thought about, a topic. I created the presentation, practiced it, and then went on stage, and then it started out my entire really whirlwind of conferences, because I spoke until now, I think, in more than 25 or 30 conferences, physical ones, and also online. So a lot of conferences in the last year and a half. So it started out like that. I was fearful like everyone. I thought I don't have anything to say like everyone. And I got a reality check that, hey, I have things to discuss, I have knowledge to share, and now I have like 7 or 8 talks that I give in conferences. I had the same fear like everyone, and that's why I'm saying, hey, if you have this fear, that's okay to have fears. Do it anyway, okay? And I'm here if you want to discuss. Reach out to me in LinkedIn or Twitter, I will help you. And you don't have to talk in conferences as a first phase. You can talk in meetups. There are meetups everywhere. Talking meetups, this is a great first step towards public speaking.
That's some good advice there. I think it's an interesting story too, just hearing that someone kind of put you on the spot and said, no, you're doing this, and gave you a constraint. And so there's some interesting things about that particular type of format as well. Did you find it difficult 5 minutes doesn't seem like a long time, but it's a long time when it's to compress topics, one. So that's an interesting challenge, but at least it's like a time frame. I think you can probably wrap your head around, okay, I can talk for 5 minutes, but this topic is too big for 5 minutes. And like, how do you get that down? And that's an interesting challenge. But yeah, I think that's interesting. I like that angle. I appreciate the person that did that for you. It's funny, I think about people on my team that I always wish that they would submit more ideas for conferences, but they're like, well, I don't know what to talk about. But if I tell them like, hey, next Friday, I need you to give like a 5 to 10 minute talk on something recently you worked on for the team, just internally, can you do that? And they're like, I'm like, I'm scheduling you, just it's going to happen. And then like end of the discussion, and then they figure it out, and it goes great every time. Like I've never had anyone bail on me. They just do it, and they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. So I think it's some good advice that if you're in a position to tell someone that they need to do it and just have them do it, or someone that would be a good speaker, but maybe isn't volunteering, it's okay to maybe be a little bit pushy. You can't force someone to do it, but at least, you can definitely encourage people as well. So I like that angle there. And that's a lot of talks to speak at within like a year and a half after your first one. So I'm pretty impressed with that. It's funny. And then the other part is, I used to speak at a lot of conferences, and now it's been many years since I've spoken at a conference, and I'm really nervous again, all over again, to start again. I'm like, who am I to talk at a conference? But I just need to force myself to do it.
Since you didn't do it for a long time, then this muscle isn't trained, and then all of the feels are coming back. But once you will do it again, you will it's like riding a bicycle at the end of the day. You'll remember why you do it, that you feel happy when you do it, and all of the things will just come back.
That's good. So I'm gonna do some thinking about that. So for those listening that are curious about this, just schedule it for yourself, or help someone else. Ask someone else to schedule one for you, and then just make it happen. And just say that you heard it on the podcast. Eli told you to do it. So, well, with that, where can listeners best follow your thoughts or contact you online to learn more about DevOps and SRE type topics?
So I will mostly post in LinkedIn, like all my talks and like snippets of my talks and things that I wanna and that I can share. I'm doing it mostly in LinkedIn. In Twitter, I'm posting stuff, like, hey, I petted a koala and stuff like that. Also about talks, but mostly about other stuff. So LinkedIn would be the way to go. And I am planning to create a website that gathers all my talks and also write blog posts that summarize my talks to writings, because some people like to hear and listen to talks and some people prefer to read. So I am planning to create a website and then have all the knowledge put in there, and then people can also reference to there. It takes time, so don't bank on it just now. So for now, it's LinkedIn. Yeah.
No, that's a good idea. I mean, you should do that. And I think because it'll take a little bit of time for this episode to get published, because I have a queue of them. So if you don't get a website done, maybe a recommendation would be you can throw a lot of those links up on like a GitHub README page. Is another little idea that I've offered up people. That's tends to be a good place to do that. But I'll definitely include links to your LinkedIn and in the show notes for everybody, so people can keep in touch with you and reach out to you and ask you more questions. With that, it's been such a delight having you join us on Maintainable, Ella. Thank you so much for talking shop with us.
Thank you for having me.
Maintainable.